My name, S. Lena Hart, 29, corporate strategist, trained to read power plays and fake smiles for a living. But that night, at my sister's wedding, I wasn't the strategist. I was the outcast, the forgotten daughter. The family's reminder of what happens when you stop being perfect. And I'll tell you this, being humiliated in a $300 dress while your family pretends you don't exist will change how you play the game forever. At my sister's wedding, I was forced to sit alone. Not by accident, not by bad luck, but by design. There's a certain kind of cruelty that hides behind family smiles, the kind that looks like love from a distance but feels like exile up close. Everyone around me was laughing, clinking glasses, pretending the world was wrapped in ribbons and champagne. And there I was, sitting at a table so far from the rest it might as well have been another country. I could see them all, the glowing faces, the proud smiles, the perfection. And I could feel it, the deliberate emptiness around me. They always said family was forever, but what they really meant was obedience was forever. The moment you stop playing the role they've written for you, they write you out of the story entirely. That's the thing about families like mine, love isn't unconditional. It's transactional. You follow their script, you earn your seat. You rewrite a single line, you eat alone. I used to believe that success would change the way they looked at me. That the degrees, the apartment, the corner office, the long hours that carved dark circles under my eyes, all of it would finally make me worthy in their language of approval. But you can't buy respect from people who have already decided you don't belong. You can't negotiate with people who think independence is rebellion. The seat card had my name on it, written in cursive gold, elegant and cruel. It wasn't an oversight, it was a message. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Don't ruin the show. The irony was thick. I could run boardrooms filled with egos and politics, yet here, in this over-decorated ballroom, I was still the problem. Still the outsider. Still the one they whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. I watched my sister glide across the floor in her perfect gown, every detail of her life orchestrated to please. She was the kind of person my parents worshipped, soft, agreeable, predictable. The one who made them look good. I used to envy her. Now I just pitied her. Because while she had their approval, she'd traded something I refused to give up herself. The laughter around me was a blur, a noise that didn't include me. I sat with my hands in my lap, pretending to scroll through my phone, pretending it didn't sting, pretending I was above it. But it did sting. It burned. Every polite smile from an aunt, every pity glance from a cousin, it all felt like a quiet declaration. You don't belong here. That's when it hit me. They weren't just excluding me. They were testing me, waiting to see if I'd shrink again. Waiting to see if I'd apologize for the way I made them uncomfortable, my ambition, my voice, my refusal to pretend. I realized something brutal in that moment. They didn't hate me for who I was. They hated me for what I represented, proof that their way wasn't the only way. So I sat there and let the silence work for me. Let them see I wasn't moving. I wasn't flinching. I wasn't playing small anymore. For years, I'd told myself I could earn my place back if I just softened, smiled more, talked less. But that night, surrounded by flowers that smelled like sugar and lies, I finally saw the truth. There was no place to earn. They de-built a table where I was never meant to sit. Something shifted inside me. The humiliation turned into fuel. The loneliness became clarity. I didn't need to be part of their perfect picture. I needed to burn the frame entirely. Families like mine survive on silence. They feed on your guilt, your need for approval, your habit of apologizing for existing differently. And the moment you stop apologizing, you become dangerous. That's when I saw him, a stranger, calm and steady, walking straight toward me like he belonged anywhere he wanted to. His eyes found mine, curious, sharp. And before I could look away, he smiled and said quietly, "You look like you could use an ally." It was such a simple line, but it landed like a match on gasoline. For the first time that night, I didn't feel invisible. There was something electric about it, not romantic, not yet, but human, recognition. Someone seeing through the act, through the walls, through the family theater of it all. When he leaned closer and said, "Act like you're with me," my first instinct was disbelief. But then I saw it, the sudden flicker of attention from my family's table, their surprise, their discomfort. And I realized this was the first time in years I'd seen them off balance. So I smiled, and for the first time that night it wasn't polite, it was power. Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Sometimes you don't get your revenge by shouting or proving them wrong or winning them over. Sometimes revenge is quieter. It's the calm smile you give when they realize you stopped needing their approval. It's showing up, uninvited, unashamed, and leaving on your own terms. They wanted me to feel small. Instead, they reminded me how big I could be. And that's the moment everything began to change. When the music swelled and the guests began to find their seats, I walked toward the reception tables, pretending not to notice the way conversations dipped as I passed. I already knew I was being watched. Families like mine love silent performances, the kind where judgment replaces applause. I found my name card tucked at the very edge of the ballroom, beside a towering floral arrangement that blocked my view of the rest. It was almost funny. Almost. There it was, my name written in gold ink, elegant, deliberate, and isolating. No plus one beside it, no cousins, no familiar faces. Just me and the expensive loneliness they'd reserved for me. Around me, tables filled with laughter, champagne glasses clinking, everyone leaning close to share inside jokes that once included me. My family's table sat in the center of it all, glowing under the chandeliers, the perfect circle of belonging. And then there was me, the glitch in their perfect picture. For a moment, I stood there holding the name card like it was evidence of something. A part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake, that maybe there'd been a mix-up. But deep down, I knew better. Families like mine don't make mistakes, they make statements. Every detail is intentional, every insult disguised as etiquette. And the message was clear. Stay quiet, stay out of frame, stay irrelevant. I took my seat anyway. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. The chair felt colder than it should have, the linen napkin folded too neatly, like the whole setup had been planned for an audience. I placed my hands on the table, aware of how empty the space around me felt, like a spotlight without applause. Across the room, I caught my mother's glance, quick, assessing, the kind she used when she wanted to check whether I'd behave. She looked away before I could hold it. My father pretended not to notice me at all. My sister, radiant and dripping in lace, was too busy playing her part to acknowledge the empty seat on the fringe of her fairy tale. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a seat. It was a stage. They'd placed me exactly where they wanted me, visible enough to remind everyone that I existed, distant enough that no one had to speak to me. A silent warning, this is what happens when you stop fitting in. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the details, the silver cutlery, the soft hum of the band, the laughter that felt just a little too loud. I could hear fragments of conversations from nearby tables, work promotions, honeymoons, new babies. The kinds of milestones families approve of. I wondered what they said about me when I wasn't in the room. Probably the same things they always did, asterisk too focused, too cold, too much. The irony, of course, was that I'd built the kind of life they told me I should, just not the way they wanted me to. The server came by to pour champagne, pausing for a beat when he saw the single-place setting. "Just you?" he asked, his voice polite but surprised. I smiled tightly. "Just me." It stung more than it should have, because it wasn't just me. It was me after years of earning everything alone, building walls so strong that even I had started to believe I didn't need anyone. But this wasn't independence. This was isolation dressed up as punishment. And yet, underneath the humiliation, something sharper began to stir, a kind of dark amusement. They thought they'd cornered me, reduced me to silence. But all they'd done was remind me how much power I'd given them for years. Every seat they offered, I took gratefully, even when it was small. Every insult, I softened with understanding. Every time they left me out, I blamed myself for being too much. Not anymore. So I lifted my glass, even though no one was watching, and toasted to the empty space around me. To the loneliness that no longer scared me. To the version of myself they couldn't stand, the one who refused to shrink. Somewhere between the clinking glasses and the choreographed laughter, I realized something brutal. The moment you stop needing their approval, you stop being manageable. And that's why they'd put me here, to remind themselves that rebellion doesn't win. But the truth was, I wasn't rebelling anymore. I was evolving. Then, just as I took a slow sip of champagne, I felt a shadow fall across my table. A tall figure paused beside me, confident, calm, as if he'd been looking for this seat all night. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said, "You look like you could use an ally." For the first time all evening, I didn't feel alone. He didn't ask for permission, just pulled out the chair beside me and sat down like he'd belonged there all along. I blinked, caught between confusion and relief. No one had dared to come near my table all night, not even the waitstaff for longer than necessary. But this man, this stranger, didn't hesitate. He leaned in just slightly, enough for his voice to reach me over the music. "Act like you're with me," he said, smooth and certain, like he'd already decided the story we were about to tell. For a moment, I just stared at him, unsure if I'd heard right. The lights reflected off his cufflinks, his confidence unsettling and oddly grounding at the same time. He didn't look like someone who asked for favors, he looked like someone who offered them strategically. His presence was magnetic, deliberate, like he was doing more than just being kind. And maybe that's what caught me off guard. I'd been invisible all evening, and suddenly I was. He smiled again, slow and steady. "Trust me," he added, eyes flicking toward my family's table across the room. And that's when I realized every head had turned. My mother's polite mask had slipped. My father, who hadn't looked my way once all night, was finally paying attention. My sister froze mid-conversation, her perfect new husband's expression stiff beside her. For the first time that evening, they didn't look composed. They looked curious, uncertain. I didn't know this man, but I understood the language he was speaking. This was a power play, and I'd been waiting all night for a chance to play. So I leaned closer, pretending to listen to whatever joke he whispered, and laughed. Not a fake laugh, but the kind that sounded like I'd just won something. Their eyes flicked between us, the whispers starting, the tension almost sweet. He extended his hand casually, introducing himself like it was the most natural thing in the world. I said my name, watching his expression shift in subtle recognition. The way people look at you when they've already heard stories about you, but never from your own mouth. There was something reassuring in his calmness, the way he seemed to anchor the chaos around me. It wasn't romance. It was alignment. We talked small things, sharp things, the kind of easy conversation that sounds effortless but cuts through noise. He didn't ask why I was sitting alone. He didn't need to. I could tell he'd already read the room, the hierarchy, the quiet cruelty that held it all together. "Families can be brutal," he said under his breath, swirling the drink in his hand. "They mistake silence for peace." I almost laughed again, because it was exactly the kind of truth no one ever says out loud. Every now and then, he'd glance over at my family's table, then look back at me with a subtle grin, like we were sharing a secret performance. And in a way, we were. Every gesture, every glance, every light touch on my arm, it was theater. And the best part? My family couldn't tell where the act ended and the truth began. I watched them struggle with it. My mother's hand froze around her glass. My father's smile tightened, the kind he used when he was pretending not to care. My sister kept sneaking looks over her shoulder, her perfect poise cracking at the edges. It was delicious. For the first time that night, I wasn't the one being managed. They were. The stranger leaned in again, his voice low but firm. "They've spent years defining you. Let them watch while you redefine yourself." The words hit harder than I expected, because that's exactly what this moment was. A quiet rebellion, a reclamation, a single spark of dignity in a room built to make me feel small. I found myself sitting straighter, smiling easier, speaking louder. The isolation that had wrapped itself around me like a chain began to melt away. My laughter carried farther than I intended, my posture unconsciously mirroring his confidence. And as the room watched, the power shifted without anyone saying a word. I didn't even care who he was anymore. Maybe he was a guest, a friend of a friend, a man who simply hated seeing anyone humiliated. It didn't matter. What mattered was that in that single act, his decision to sit beside me, to see me, he'd flipped the entire narrative. He clinked his glass lightly against mine, his eyes steady on me. "Looks like they're paying attention now," he murmured. I didn't have to look to know he was right. Every eye in the room was on us. And for once, I didn't shrink under it. I let them watch. I wanted them to. Because they'd tried to erase me with silence, and instead, they'd given me the spotlight. And as the music swelled again, something in me shifted completely. I wasn't the outcast anymore. I was the disruption. He sat down like he owned the air around him. No hesitation, no awkward pause, just calm certainty, the kind that makes people stop talking without realizing why. I blinked, halfway through pretending to scroll my phone, caught off guard. No one had dared to come near my table all night. I'd been invisible, carefully quarantined by bloodlines and social rules. But this man, he didn't seem to recognize either. He leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that I had to tilt forward to catch it. "Act like you're with me," he said. Just like that, no explanation, no request, just a command delivered in a tone so steady it cut through the noise like glass. For a heartbeat, I just stared at him, the words hovering between disbelief and curiosity. I wanted to ask who he was, why he cared, what he thought he was doing, but I didn't. Something in his voice told me to play along. So I did. I turned toward him, tilted my head, let a small, practiced smile spread across my face. Across the room, heads began to turn. My mother's eyes found me first, her expression flickering like static before she masked it with polite surprise. My father followed, his jaw tightening, the same way it used to when I said something he couldn't control. My sister froze mid-laugh, her new husband leaning in to whisper something as her gaze sharpened on us. For the first time that night, they were the ones watching me, not ignoring, watching. The stranger noticed it too. "There it is," he murmured, lips barely moving. "Now they see you." He picked up his glass, motioned to the waiter for another for me, and leaned back with an easy kind of confidence that looked rehearsed but wasn't. He didn't ask for my story, he already seemed to know enough. His eyes flicked to the family table, then back to me. "They didn't expect this," he said quietly. "People like that never do." I wanted to ask what he meant by people like that asterisk, but I didn't need to. He saw what everyone else pretended not to, the Cold War of smiles, the silent choreography of power, the way family can wound you without lifting a finger. And suddenly, sitting next to him didn't feel strange. It felt like balance. We started talking, or at least pretending to, small things at first. He said something dry, something that made me laugh, and it came out louder than I intended. Heads turned again. This time, I didn't care. The laughter wasn't for them, it was for me. It was proof that they hadn't broken me, not completely. The man leaned closer, his tone half teasing, half serious. "You have no idea how much you're unsettling them right now." I smiled into my glass. "Good," I said. "They've been doing it to me for years." He chuckled softly, and the sound made something inside me loosen. It wasn't about attraction, it was recognition. The kind that happens when someone sees the full picture and doesn't look away. Every time he spoke, I could feel my posture straightening, my guard lowering, my energy shifting. He was teaching me, without meaning to, how to reclaim space I'd forgotten I was allowed to occupy. Across the room, I could sense the change. My family's laughter grew tighter, their smiles thinner. My mother whispered something behind her hand, my father's eyes never quite leaving our table. My sister, radiant in white, glanced over again, confusion cutting through her composure. She didn't like not knowing the story, not being the center of attention. It wasn't about jealousy, it was control. She'd spent her entire life managing how everyone saw her. Now, for once, they were seeing me instead. He reached for his glass, tilted it toward me. "Let them wonder," he said. "They built this theater, you're just stealing the spotlight." The words hit deeper than they should have. Maybe because he was right. My whole life, I'd been reacting to the roles they gave me, the quiet one, the difficult one, the disappointment. But at that moment, something shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was performing on my own terms. I could feel the heat of the room chain, the tension, the whispers, the way even the band seemed to play a little louder, as if trying to drown out the news story unfolding in the corner. And through it all, the stranger stayed calm, unreadable, anchored in a way that made me feel strangely safe. I didn't know who he was or why he'd chosen to sit with me, but I knew this. He'd turned a humiliation into a scene I controlled. With one sentence, he'd handed me back the power my family had taken piece by piece. I caught my reflection in the rim of the champagne glass, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, a faint smile that wasn't for anyone's approval. I didn't look like the girl sitting alone anymore. I looked like someone rewriting the narrative. And when he said quietly, "Smile, they're still watching," I did. Because this time, it wasn't an act of politeness. It was an act of war. He played the part effortlessly. The stranger, who still hadn't given me his name, seemed to understand the rhythm of the room better than anyone in it. Every move he made was intentional, measured, quietly theatrical. A hand resting lightly on the back of my chair, a laugh that lingered just long enough to sound intimate, a subtle lean closer whenever someone looked our way. It wasn't overdone. It was precise, controlled, and it worked. My family was unraveling. From across the room, I could see it, the flicker of discomfort behind their smiles, the barely concealed curiosity burning through their politeness. My mother's hand gripped her wine glass like she was holding on to composure. My father kept pretending to listen to someone else but couldn't stop glancing in our direction. My sister, in her flawless lace gown, looked like she'd swallowed a stone. Her smile was stuck, too bright, too forced. And for once, I didn't feel like I was intruding on their perfect world. I felt like I was cracking it open. The stranger leaned toward me again, voice low enough to feel more than hear. "You've spent a long time letting them define you, haven't you?" I froze, not because of the question, but because of the accuracy. It wasn't pity in his tone, it was recognition. I wanted to deny it, to act like I was fine, like their opinions didn't touch me anymore. But the truth sat heavy between us. I had spent years fighting for a kind of acceptance that was never coming. He looked at me, eyes steady. "Stop defending yourself," he said. "They already decided who you are, you don't owe them a correction." Something inside me snapped, quietly, cleanly, like a thread breaking. All the times I'd tried to explain myself, to justify my choices, to soften my edges so I wouldn't seem like a threat, it all suddenly felt ridiculous. These people weren't interested in understanding me. They were interested in keeping me predictable, and I had been cooperating without even realizing it. The waiter came by again, this time setting down 2 fresh glasses of champagne. The stranger lifted his and clinked it lightly against mine. "To performance," he said, smirking. I raised an eyebrow. "Performance?" He nodded toward the family table. "You think this is real? Any of it? Weddings like this are theater, everyone playing their assigned part. But you," he paused, eyes narrowing slightly, "you just went off script, and they don't know how to handle it." I laughed quietly because he was right. Every gesture at that table had been choreographed for years. Who laughs when, who compliments who sits where, who pretends what. It wasn't love. It was strategy. And I'd been benched for refusing to play by the old rules. But not tonight. Something shifted in me as we sat there, something small but irreversible. I stopped shrinking. My posture changed. My smile stopped being polite and started being deliberate. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was directing. Every glance, every tilt of my head, every touch of my hand on my glass was part of my new script. I'd spent my whole life apologizing for taking up space. Now I was daring them to notice how much space I could take. The stranger caught it too. "There," he said softly, almost like he was talking to himself. "That's what they were afraid of." I followed his gaze across the room. My sister was staring now, not even pretending otherwise. Her new husband leaned in to whisper something, and she nodded stiffly, her smile gone. My mother's eyes were narrow, analyzing, calculating the damage. My father shifted in his seat, the way he used to before a board meeting when something wasn't going to plan. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't even want it. I wanted them to see that the person they tried to sideline had stopped waiting for their permission to exist. The band started playing again, something slow, cinematic. The stranger stood and extended his hand toward me. "Dance with me," he said. I almost refused. Old instinct. Don't draw attention, don't make it worse. But then I remembered I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. So I stood. When we stepped onto the dance floor, the room tilted. Eyes followed. Conversations faltered. My sister's perfect smile froze completely. The stranger placed a hand lightly at my back and guided me through the rhythm, his voice barely above the music. "You don't have to win them," he said. "You just have to stop losing yourself." It was such a simple thing, but it hit harder than any insult I'd ever swallowed. I wasn't winning approval that night, I was reclaiming narrative. They had written me as the problem, the disappointment, the outsider. But here I was, center stage, unashamed, uninvited, undeniable. As the song ended, the applause was polite, confused, too restrained to be genuine. It didn't matter. I smiled, met every pair of watching eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being judged. I felt like the one holding the mirror. That's when I realized I'd been defending myself against their version of me for too long. From now on, they'd have to defend themselves against mine. When the music faded and the lights softened, it was time for speeches. The part of the night designed to make everyone feel sentimental and seen. Except me, of course. I already knew how this would go. My father would make a toast dripping with pride, my mother would dab at her eyes like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, and my sister would beam, glowing in her perfection. There would be laughter, applause, and carefully edited memories. The family version of truth, selective, glossy, and incomplete. I watched them prepare for it, the same way I'd watched them prepare for every performance growing up. My father adjusted his cufflinks, my mother rehearsed her lines under her breath, my sister clutched her husband's hand just tight enough to look adoring. Every movement rehearsed, every smile choreographed. I knew the script before they opened their mouths. He raised his glass first, clearing his throat, voice warm and steady, the tone of a man comfortable with being admired. "To Grace," he began, eyes fixed on my sister. "Our shining light, you've made us proud every single day." His gaze swept across the room but skipped me like a skipped track on an old record. I sat still, unflinching. The stranger beside me noticed, his hand brushing mine under the table, not intimately, just grounding. A reminder that I didn't need to react. My father kept going. He spoke of loyalty, of family, of unity, words that sounded noble until you realized they were his code for obedience. I could feel the weight of the room leaning into his every word. When the applause came, I smiled, small and deliberate. Let them have their performance. I had mine. Then my mother stood, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "And of course," she said sweetly, "we're grateful for everyone who came tonight to celebrate our family." She glanced in my direction for the first time all evening. The pause that followed was microscopic but loud enough to feel. "It means so much to have everyone together again." Her eyes held mine for one brief, loaded second. The message was clear: don't ruin this. But before I could even respond, the stranger raised his glass. His movement was smooth, casual, confident. "A toast," he said, voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the noise. Every head turned toward him. He looked directly at my father, then at me. "To Lena," he said, his tone light but deliberate. "The bold one in the family." The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched through the air like a held breath. My mother froze, her smile cracking for the first time all night. My father blinked once, thrown off balance. My sister stared, her expression stuck somewhere between confusion and irritation. No one clapped at first. They didn't know how to. And then I laughed, quietly at first, then louder. It wasn't nervous, it was pure release. I lifted my own glass and said, "I'll drink to that." The clinking of crystal broke the tension, small, sharp, defiant. The stranger smiled beside me, the faintest glint of triumph in his eyes. The applause that finally followed was thin and awkward, but it didn't matter. The silence before it had said everything. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the uninvited presence politely ignored. I was the disruption they hadn't planned for. My father tried to recover, clearing his throat, muttering something about courage and family differences, but the control was gone. The moment had shifted permanently. The stranger leaned toward me again, voice low enough that only I could hear. "They've built their whole world around the illusion of perfection," he said. "You just reminded them that truth still exists." He was right, because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to show up unbothered. The band started playing again, and the chatter returned, louder than before, desperate to fill the air that truth had just burned clean. But I didn't hear any of it. I sat back, a slow calm settling over me, watching my family scramble to stitch their composure back together. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't defending myself or begging to be understood. I was simply there, seen, undeniable, untouchable. The stranger raised his glass again, barely tilting it toward me. "To visibility," he said softly. And I smiled because visibility, real, unapologetic visibility, was something they could never take from me again. Across the room, my sister's perfect smile faltered just slightly. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but I saw it, I always did, and it was enough. When the night finally thinned out and the chandeliers dimmed to their low, golden hum, I stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching what was left of the celebration unravel. Empty glasses, wilted flowers. A few guests pretending they weren't desperate to leave. My family still lingered near the center, grinning for photos that already looked strained. You could see the cracks if you knew where to look, and I did. The stranger stood beside me, silent but steady. He didn't need to say anything. The moment didn't need commentary. It was enough to feel the quiet satisfaction humming between us, the the kind that doesn't come from revenge exactly, but from recognition, from seeing the truth finally sit in the open air, unmasked. I looked across the room at my sister. She caught my gaze for half a second before looking away. That was new. Usually, she looked asterisk through asterisk me, not away. My father avoided my eyes altogether, too busy pretending to laugh at something that wasn't funny. My mother glanced over once, as if she wanted to say something, but her face softened into that familiar, weary mixture of denial and pride. The let's just move on expression she'd worn my entire life. But I wasn't moving on, I was moving out. All night, they'd tried to make me small to remind me of my place. And instead, I'd shown them what happens when you stop asking for one. That was the real revenge, not anger, not confrontation. Freedom. I turned toward the stranger. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "I used to think they excluded me because I wasn't enough like them. Now I realize it's because I stopped pretending to be." He smiled, slow and knowing. That's what power looks like. It's not being invited back, it's not needing the invitation. I looked down at my empty glass, then set it on the nearest table. My hands felt steady, my breathing light. For the first time in years, I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head or bracing for judgment. I felt done, not bitter done. The music changed to something soft, the kind of song meant to close out a night. My sister danced with her husband under the fading lights, smiling too wide for the camera. I watched for a moment, not out of envy, but out of clarity. She could keep the script, the applause, the illusion. I didn't want any of it anymore. The stranger nodded toward the exit, ready to go. "Yeah," I said, and this time I didn't glance back. The night air outside hit like oxygen after years underwater. Cool, sharp, alive. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, feeling the noise of the ballroom fade behind me. The stars above looked indifferent, beautiful, and free, exactly how I wanted to be. He walked me toward the valet, both of us quiet. Before I left, he turned to me, his voice steady. "They'll talk about this for years," he said. "Good," I replied. "Let them." He smiled. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not," I said. "They built that cage. I just learned how to walk through the door." He nodded once, a kind of salute, and I knew I'd never see him again. He served his purpose, the catalyst, not the story. The story was mine now. I drove away without looking back. The reflection of the venue faded in the rearview mirror, and for a brief, sharp second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind you get from forgiveness or resolution, the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Family will forgive any sin, except independence. They'll celebrate you when you're useful and exile you when you're free. And when you stop needing their permission to exist, they'll call it rebellion. Let them. Because peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from walking out of rooms that demand your silence. And as I drove into the night, the road stretched wide and endless ahead of me, whispering a promise I finally believed. You were never the problem, you were just the first to wake up.